So we're going to get started by creating the base of the piece. First I've made a little drawing with my stone in it so that I know roughly the shape and size that I need to make. For this piece I've used square wire, but round wire will equally work, just for integrity. I like square wire because it seems to stay in shape better. So if you have that, that's great. If not, that's also fine. So just use your fingers to bend, or you can equally just take an object and bend it in place. I just prefer to use my fingers personally, but everybody's different, so you just do what works for you best. So reference it back to the drawing every now and then just keep working. This can take some time, that's absolutely fine. Just as long as you're happy with the end result, that's great. So keep shaping it, and as you handle the wire and warm it up, it'll also become easier to shape it. So just take your time with that, and then just keep going until you're satisfied. There we go. So I've bent in the sides a little bit so that I'm happy with the overall shape. And next we need to create the bail. So I'm manipulating it so that the wires are parallel. And next I'm bringing in my half round wires. So I'm going to go at the bottom first, attaching a little section there, and then I'm flipping it over and I'm winding the half round quite slowly around the let's call it the stem. And yeah, take your time with this as well. If you're using half round wire, again, if you don't have half round, this can also work with normal round wire. Use whatever you have handy. The end result will basically be the same. So just take a little section at the bottom. I should have done this at the start and wrap it round to keep it in place, and I reference it back to my stone. Next, shaping the bail with thick wire like that, you may need to use a tool because it'd be hard to shape it with your fingers unless you've got strong fingers. I know some people do. I don't, so I need to use tool. So keep shaping it, and then I'm going to feed the two legs through the opening, and I'm just going to wrap the two legs around the base or the top of the pear, shall we say. Cut off a piece because it's easier to loop it through. So gently manipulate the wire until it's in place. As I said, it can be quite difficult to do because it's quite thick wire. You don't really need to use that thicker wire. If you don't have it handy, you can use something else. I just find it great to have because it's really strong, and the frame won't actually, bend or bend out of shape or anything like that. So use a very strong pair of cutters. You don't want to ruin your dainty flush cutter, so use an heavy duty tool for that. Cut off those wires, so always have two handy. So next we need to create the base. I've cut a couple of pieces here that I want to use. 2 or 3 will suffice. So you're just going to decide how many you need as you go along. I've cut 3 just in case, but I've only actually used 2 for this piece. So I'm going to start by lining them up with the bottom, and I'm going to wrap the legs around the bottom first. This is always a little bit fiddly at this stage, so just again take your time. The slower you go, the easier it gets. I find I'm a slow worker anyway, so I just take my time, but if once you've done this a couple of times, you get used to it as well. So wrap it round, and be careful with the square wire if you're using it that it sits flush. Sometimes it kind of sits sideways, so that one of the edges is pointing up, which makes the whole wrap a little bit bulky. So pay attention to that to keep the wrap as neat as possible. So then we're going to do the other side, and just trim off the ends, and we're going to repeat this with a second row above it, and that was enough for this piece because I wanted to just cradle the stone basically. So that's what it looks like. I'm going to add the second one at the top right there, and then that's what the final result looks like, and that's all we need. It doesn't need any more because the stone kind of sits at the bottom. That's enough to keep it in place, just to keep the stone from falling out and give it some support. Next, bringing in our wires, and we are going to feed all of those 3 wires through the top at the bell, and these are going to be used to create the detail weaving. So I'm just going to loop it round the bale a couple of times. Once is actually enough. A bit fiddly again at this stage, so just take your time. So feed it through the loop, and gently pull it out. You really want to make sure that the wires sit parallel to each other and don't cross over each other, because that will make the whole top bale bulky. So just take your time again and make sure that when you are feeding them through, they sit nice and flush to each other. So as you go along, I straighten the wires to pull them through, as they tend to kind of bend over themselves and then get in the way. So just take your time, pull the wires, and if you wanted to, if it's still a bit loose, you can then go around them again. I also take a pair of pliers to squeeze them down a little bit, because that will kind of strengthen or harden the wire and it will stay in place better. So bring in pair of pliers and gently squish them down, not too much obviously, don't want to damage them. And this is what it looks like. So got quite long wires on each side, and I'm going to go around one more time to make sure that they are actually attached, because I think they were a little bit flimsy. So when you get that, just loop them around one more time. Just make sure that you lay the wires, the second row of wires, above the first. You don't want the section to get too bulky, so kind of lay them on top, not on top, above the first row. And again, always make sure that they are parallel to each other, and that's what it looks like. So now it's much stronger. Next, going to bring in our weaving wire, and I'm going to separate it out in half. So one half is on the left and the other on the right. It's just how I work. Everybody does it differently. Some people bring in separate pieces of weaving wire. I really tend to keep my wires and you reuse them throughout the project. So I don't like adding in new wires. It's just the way I work, but everybody's different. So in this case, what we're going to weave is a 5x2. And the 5x2 is basically 5 times wrapping around the base wire, like I'm doing here. So I'm looping my 0.4 wire around the base 5 times. And then I'm going to go around both wires at the same time twice. And then I'm going to repeat the process. I'm zooming in here a bit, so hopefully you can see. So it's 5 times around the base, like so. And just gently push the weave in as you work, because that will make sure that it's nice and neat. So I don't know, everybody does this, I do it. I tend to bring in a pair of pliers every now and then to push up the weaves, because I like them neat. So that's the way I work. But as I said, everybody is different and has their own technique. Do whatever works for you. And then obviously again twice around both wires here. And that's what it looks like. So we've got several rows. You will need to adjust the weaves depending on how big your stone is and how big your frame. So this is just a guide. I'll tell you how many weaves I've used for my size of stone, and then you'll just need to adjust it to, obviously your stone will be different from mine, so just adjust it to whatever size stone you have. So just going to gently twirl it in an anti-clockwise motion around the frame. Be sure to leave a little bit of a loop at the top, and then just gently shape it. So again, this is pretty much an organic design as well. You know, you can just lay down the way you like it, slightly lift differently obviously to the way I've done it. This is just a guidance to how I've made this pendant, so you can adjust it to your liking and see whichever way you like, you know, the shape best. So just loop it around twice again at the bottom to make sure that it's nice and tight, and this is what it looks like. So next we're going to weave around the top 3 wires. So this goes 5 times around the top wire, then once around the top 2 wires, once around the bottom 2 wires, back up around the top 2 wires, and then start afresh with your 5 wraps around the top wire. So when you're starting a weave, sometimes it gets pushed in, so I want to show you a bit more up close. So this is what it looks like. So basically you start, now I've done my 5 at the top. I'm wrapping around both top wires once, bring it up in between wire 1 and 2, wrap it around the 2 bottom wires once, bring it in between 2 and 3 and wrap it around the top 2 wires once, and then back around the top wire 5 times, and then repeat this weave until you've got enough. Again, you need to obviously create enough weave for your stone and your size of frame. So I'm showing you how many I've done here so that you know how many instances of that weave I've done, and then you just obviously adjust it. So this is what it looks like, and then obviously repeat enough times so that you have got enough. Check your stone, and obviously it won't stay in place yet, but I like to reference back to it as I work, so I do bring it in every now and then just to see what the weave should look like. So I'm going to then just twist this wire from over the top, and I'm going to kind of follow the first weave and then attach it to the bottom as well. It's kind of laid across, and again this is organic, so you go roughly how you like it as well. I quite like that. So now I'm going to attach the bottom wires around the frame again. That's what it looks like. So obviously take your time with the wires, and as you're attaching them, make sure once again that they are parallel to each other. If they kind of cross over, they create a bit of bulk at the bottom. So just when you're attaching them, be sure to make sure that they lay next to each other rather than crossing each other. There we go. If you need to, once again, you can attach it, wrap it one more time. I tend to wrap around twice, and then also press it down with pliers just to get enough grip onto the frame wire. And this is where the frame thickness is quite helpful, because it obviously won't buckle, and it's quite strong. That's why I like to use thicker wire for my frames. Right, so that's the stone set in place, and that's kind of what it looks like so far. I like that at the moment. So setting it aside, and now we're creating a shape with the 3 wires that we had left over from the top weave, and I'm going to do the same weave again that we've just done from the top. So it's 5 times around the top. Again, I'm going to zoom in to show you. I'm just showing you where to start. So just wrap around 5 times around the top. There you go. And then I'm going to wrap around once around the top 2 wires once, around the bottom wires, both bottom wires once, and then obviously you go back in between wire 2 and 3 and go around the top 2 wires once, and then repeat the process. Start with your 5 wraps around the top wire again, and then that's the whole process completed. So that's one instance of the weave, and you just repeat that until you've got enough weave. See here, I bring in my pliers. These bent nose pliers are perfect. I like using them because they really help. So that's what it looks like. So I've got enough. Again, I bring my stone in to reference it. This kind of will keep the stone in place. It's not quite as tight as it should be yet, or as you want it to be, so you need to make sure that afterwards you secure it a bit more, but I'll show you how to do that in a second. So just bring in your wires and attach it around one of the cross members that we have attached, to keep the stone in place, and this will also start helping to secure the stone in place, because obviously there's a bit of structure around it. So just kind of shape it as you like it to be before you tie it down. Flip it over, and then you can start attaching the wires around the cross members. You could also attach it around the frame, but if you start with the cross members, it will give the stone a little bit of integrity, keep it in place as well. Earlier you saw me wrap the wires all three in one go. Once you start getting into design a bit more, you'll need to kind of wrap one wire at a time, because obviously space becomes limited, and it's much easier to manipulate. And this is what it looks like when you have attached all three wires. So next we're going to reuse those wires on the side, and I'm going to set aside one of the wires, and I'm going to now flip it over, so we're working now with the bottom two wires. And we're just going to recreate a simple 2x5, just like we did at the beginning of the weave. So separate them out and just restart. So this time we're going to put the wraps, the 5 wraps on the bottom wire. So just loop your wire around the wire 5 times, and remember to push up your weave to make sure that it's nice and neat. Oh, you don't have to, I just prefer to do it because it will make the whole piece look neat and tidy, so I quite like doing it. It may, you know, elongate the time or take longer to get a piece finished, but I find personally it looks better when you do that. So just keep going until you have got your weaves, enough weaves to create the shape. Push it in. I like to use my bent nose pliers. So once you've done enough, we are going to bend the first wire upwards because we're going to wrap around it. So make sure this is pointing upwards, and then we're going to twirl anti-clockwise and meet up with the frame again. And this is creating a little detail here on the side. Next, we're just going to take those wires now and we're going to wrap these around the frame. Again, this is why I like to use sturdy frame wire, because you can manipulate it and attach things to it without it, you know, buckling or bending out of shape. So I like using thicker wire for that. So just pull this up with a pair of pliers. As I said earlier, once you get a bit further into design, you know, space becomes sparse. So you just go slower and attach one at a time if necessary. So just wrap around one more time, and that will make sure everything is attached tightly. Pull that through and then give it a good pull to attach, and then maybe squidge it down a bit. Very technical term, is it? And then just squidge it down and attach. So next, I quite like to use single wires as little detail pieces. So you don't need to put any weave on it or anything, but you could, if you wanted to, just coil wire around it if you want that extra detail. So I'm going to use that as single wire to just create a little bit of interest around the swirl we've just made, and I'm going to attach it as well, just like we did with the other wires. Pull it up, and this in turn will also what can I say, reunite the 3 wires, so that then you can use these in a separate design. So they're all back together, and now we're going to create a new weave. So it's the same pattern again that we've just done. So it is 5 times around the top wire, once around wire 1 and 2, once around wire 2 and 3, and then once around wire 1 and 2 again, and then start afresh. So as always, take your time and use your pliers to adjust the weave if necessary. When you're starting a new weave like that, it's always a little bit more fiddly at the base, because you kind of need to get the wires in there to cover the area. So it may not look as neat as you want in the beginning, but once you get a bit further along and you use a pair of pliers like that to push the weave in, it bunches everything up, and then it starts to look okay. And also, once you've done that, there's a little bit more integrity to the weave, and it'll start to get easier to do the weave as well. So just keep going until you've got enough of a weave, and that's what it looks like so far. And this is the amount of weaves we need to create the little detail now. So we're just going to bend it round and create a swirl and move back down to the stone. Now these weaves can be adjusted later on. If you're not happy with the way they're sitting, you can then use a pair of pliers to slightly adjust them. I do that quite often. Go over a piece once it's settled and just adjust to the way I like it. So entirely up to you. Again, you can leave it over the top weave or under the weave coming from the top, so whatever you like. So once you have decided where you want the wire to sit, bring it through near or behind the cross member at the stone, and this will wedge the stone in place as well. So you just pull the wire through, then attach the wire to the cross member like so. And you have that one little wire left at the front, and once again we're going to use this to create a little bit of interest and detail. So what I'm going to do with it is create a little swirl that will fit right into the swirl that the weave has created. So I'm putting my thumb over it, and that will give me the opportunity to shape the wire in place. So that's really helpful when trying to create a detail like that fits into another weave. So put your thumb where you want it to sit, and that will help you to guide the wire in place. And then once again, obviously feed it through and attach to the same cross member, and this will further wedge your stone in place. And kind of adjust it. You can adjust the size, where the weave sits, the loop sits, and so forth, until you're satisfied with the result. That's what it looks like so far. Next, going to get rid of the wires at the bottom. I thought I could maybe do something with it, but I actually didn't like the look of it, so I decided to trim them off. Once again, up to you. You could do something with it. Organic design again, so you may decide that you'd like to do an extra weave or so. It's up to you. Lastly, we've got one lonely single wire at the top, so I thought it would be quite nice to create a little detail. So shape it into place and kind of shape it along the longer weaves coming from the top and wrap it around a little gap at the bottom. Again, wrap it twice or so until it's nice and secure. So just use your pliers, and I'm putting my finger over the wire where it's coming through at the front to prevent the wire to be pulled out of shape as you are tightening it at the bottom. So put your finger through when you're tightening it so that it won't be bent out of shape. Next, creating a little detail at the bottom with that wire. So once again, I'm putting my finger where I want the swirl to sit, and I'm guiding it into place, and I kind of lay it alongside the little weave on the left of the stone, and I'm bringing the wire underneath one of the detailed swirls, and I'm going to attach it to the frame, to one of the cross members, and just secure it in place there. So this one doesn't really matter where you put that one, as it's just a single wire, so just attach it wherever so that it's out of place and just keeps the shape, and then basically shape it after, and that's what it looks like so far. Next, we need to create a little detailed stone. For that, again, using square wire. You can also use round, obviously, but I find square wire works a lot better to keep the stone in place, and it kind of shapes better too, so I kind of like to use it. So very gently create the initial cradle, just big enough for the table to sit on top of it, but not big enough for the stone to fall out. You want the light to go through the stone, so you want as much open area as possible while keeping the stone secure. So once you've done that, very slowly, the slower you go, the neater it will be. It takes a bit of practice, but once you've got it down, it's a beautiful way of setting stones. My actual favorite to showcase little facet cuts. So very gently loop the wire around, take your time, and make sure that the whole of the table is covered by the wire. Keep going around until you make sure the stone is very securely wedged. And then all we're going to do is bring that wire from the top. So I think I need to go a little bit further, so you can just adjust it. And I'm going to bring it round until the whole table is covered, as I said. And all I'm going to do once that's happened, I'm going to wrap the top wire around the bottom wire. So for that I'm going to bring a pair of pliers and I'm bending the wire away from the stone, the bottom wire, at a 90-degree angle. Then I'm going to wrap the top wire as closely as possible to the actual weave or the wrap, and I'm looping it around so it looks a bit like a lollipop basically, and that's what it looks like. Very secure, won't come apart. And if you need to, you can secure the loop a bit with a pair of pliers, trim off the edges, and then attach it to the frame at the back here. So it doesn't again matter where you attach it to. I kind of spread the two little tails out and attach them on one side each, because that will secure the stone better. It will be not as loose. So this is quite nice and tight in there, and I love the way it looks. And lastly, one of my favorite bits is to actually add the detailed copper beads. I love adding them in because they add so much interest to a piece. I adore them. If you don't have copper beads, I'll quite often use microfaceted gemstones, because not only are they beautiful genuine gemstones as well, but they add a lot of sparkle just because of the way they're faceted. So if you don't have that, you can add whatever you like to it as well. Obviously, this is just to create detail and hide some of the frame that's left on the side. If you don't have any beads at all, you can attach a little bit of wire where you see me here attaching the 0.4, and then hide that little bit of frame that way. So you can also attach these beads if you want to with 0.6 millimeter wires, which has got a little bit more strength than the 0.4. And attach it this way. I tend to reuse the same piece of wire throughout my piece, as I said earlier. So even when attaching my accents, I kind of feed the wire through little gaps and nooks and crannies to bring the wire up, and then add more accents that way, because obviously there's less of a chance of the wire to come undone. So I do that as well. And the last step is to obviously trim off your wires in such a way that don't snag on clothing. Yes, and that's that. So don't forget to hit subscribe for more tutorials. Feel free to join my brand new community group, Wire Wrap Artists and Jewelry Makers Worldwide, on Facebook. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.